The son of the President of the United States has just pleaded not guilty. Not guilty is what he has pleaded to. The judge here says that she will not accept or reject the plea agreement. She wants more information. Basically, what she is asking for is to determine whether or not it's appropriate for her to consider something in the diversion program. This relates to the gun charge. So as part of that agreement, effectively what you have here is a provision which asks the court to weigh whether or not possibly Hunter Biden could have violated his pretrial diversion agreement as it relates to the gun charge. What would happen, according to that agreement, is that the defense and the prosecution would have the opportunity to bring the facts to the court and for the court to determine whether or not there was a breach of that. If there is a breach, then the government could then move forward and prosecute Hunter Biden on the gun charge. What she says is, wait just a minute. I'm not somebody who normally has to consider those provisions. I normally don't see a pretrial diversion agreement. And now you're putting me in the position, possibly, of being the gatekeeper as to whether or not the Justice Department and the government files charges against Hunter Biden. That's not a situation from a separation of powers and a constitutionality that she feels immediately that she should be there, that she should make a determination on. So that's what this hinges on. She also has some Rule 11, that's whether or not she can accept a guilty plea or not. And there's different versions of that, where either she just kind of effectively rubber stamps an agreement or whether or not she can challenge a plea agreement and determine whether she wants to accept it or not. Long story short here. Yeah. This morning, we believe that this would be just a simple guilty plea. The judge would accept it. The president's son would say that he committed tax crimes, that possible gun charges would be part of a pretrial diversion agreement. There would be a likely probation as a result of that, and we'd be out of here in 2 hours. Now, the judge wants both sides to provide briefs to the court and then have everybody come back here to be able to provide some sort of either new language or new sort of provisions to these agreements that exclude her or something that satisfies the court. At that point, then Hunter Biden has the opportunity, if they come to an agreement, to plead guilty. But as it stands right now, the president's son, Hunter Biden, has pleaded not guilty and is, in fact, at this point, it's unclear where we stand with this case in trial. And it's possible they don't come to an agreement long term, though I think that's unlikely. So I need to put in my ability to hear you all. Tom, I'll let you speak for a second, and then we can go from there.
Yeah. Okay. So Tom can't hear me because he's getting his IFB in, which is the thing that's in his ear normally, in which he hears me when I ask my questions. But I think what we're hearing and what we're learning now, obviously there's been a lot of twists and turns over the last few hours with this thing. We thought this was going to be an open and shut case, right? Hunter Biden would show up in court today, plead guilty. They would have this plea agreement and everything would go forward pretty smoothly. I think I got Tom Winter back now. But in fact, that is not the case, Tom, as you have laid out for us. And in fact, there has been a major turn of events. And the president of the United States' son has, in fact, pled not guilty in court today. And so to be on the record with this, Tom, and to be clear for folks that are watching at home, there is no plea deal today.
That's right. There is no plea deal today. So let me kind of take us back. I know we're kind of providing a little bit of the play-by-play. Typically what happens in a federal court in a proceeding involving a guilty plea is and there are different rules that govern this. So it's different ways that the judge can accept a plea agreement between two parties. One of the ways that she does it is a possibility of just accepting it and saying, okay, you two have an agreement, essentially a contract between the federal prosecutors, the United States Justice Department, and a defendant. And I'm here to just make sure the defendant is of sound mind and body and believes that they've received effective counsel, and to accept that plea and to notify the defendant of any sort of rights. That's the option that prosecutors were moving forward today, along with Hunter Biden's attorneys. There's another provision of that rule, which the judge can make some inquiries of that plea agreement and determine whether or not they accept the plea agreement. And that's something that, frankly, I more typically see in my limited experience of covering these various types of plea agreements, because we normally never go down these roads at all. And the judge says, I might normally accept that. except for you all sent me a copy of your pretrial diversion agreement, which pertains to the gun charge. And the judge says in that you're asking me to potentially one day make a determination as to whether or not the facts add up to Hunter Biden violating that agreement. And then the government can make an argument there after that point as to whether or not they want to pursue charges. She has some current concerns about that from a constitutionality perspective and separation of powers, where she believes I might be in a position where I'm a gatekeeper as to whether or not the government files charges. Federal prosecutors say, well, okay, that's fine, but that's up to us, Judge. We're the ones that entered into this agreement. We entered into it with Hunter Biden's attorneys. So, frankly, it's an agreement between us. Not really sure why you need to weigh in on it. Bottom line here is the judge now has to accept the plea because we had the initial appearance in the early part of this hearing and has to accept the plea from Hunter Biden today. She says she's not willing to accept or reject this plea agreement, but she wants some more information before she makes a decision. As a result, she still has to take a plea today. And Hunter Biden and his attorneys, in a discussion that lasted maybe 2 seconds, did the thing that I think anybody in his position would do and say, well, I'm not going to plead guilty to anything. I don't have an agreement anymore. The judge hasn't made that determination. So that's where we stand on this. That's the short story, which I know sounds long. This is something that should have lasted, in my experience of this, an hour and a half, truly dependent upon the enormity of any sort of criminal information, basically on what somebody did. The more that they did, the sometimes longer it is, because sometimes the judges like to read the conduct into the record. It's part of the official court proceeding, and so it's not just something that's filed in paper. And so, yes, that can take a long time depending upon what the person is charged with. In something like this, where it's 2 misdemeanor counts, it's a short range of criminal conduct, relatively speaking. It should not have lasted that long.